just wonder how all that affected your imagination, as a writer now. I'm a writer, and when you write, you're sort of always using experiences from your own life that sort of make their way into the novel and things like that, or your own imagination.
True.
Um,
I
so, did your imagination start early, as a kid, and the things you were seeing, and you made up stories, or?
I think that kind of. I think at the time when I was living up that far north, I was probably about. I think I moved there when I was about 5, 4.5,
Yeah.
5 years old. We left probably when I was about 7. So I think my imagination probably got more, strengthened when we moved to what we call the mid north, which was a place called Petawawa and then Deep River. And again, it was, isolated. You were on the Trans-Canada Highway, a small town. Deep River was a different town because it was, actually, I think of Los Alamos. I think it was in
Yeah.
1943 that they had Mackenzie King, which was the Canadian Prime Minister. They had the American President, and they had the British Prime Minister, and they all got together secretly and they parceled up, research for the nuclear
Wow.
power, or for not nuclear power, but the nuclear
The
bomb.
bomb.
And of course, we all know of Los Alamos, but we've never heard of Chalk River. And I think Portland Downs was in England where they were developing nuclear weaponry. And so what happened is Chalk River attracted a lot of scientists.
Yeah.
And Chalk River was about 8 or 10 miles from Deep River. And Deep River was a prisoner of war camp. It was a German prisoner of war camp. So they had like barracks, like our Cub Hall, when I was in Cubs and Scouts, was an actual prisoner of war barracks. I mean, I lived like maybe 300 feet away, so you see the building all the time. And they had those types of buildings all over town. And the history of it was that they had originally Deep River was a POW camp. And
Wow.
so what they did is they came into Chalk River and they started developing, secretly, of course, this nuclear bomb. So I grew up with a lot of sons and daughters of scientists. My best friend's father was a nuclear physicist. A lot of the industry was geared towards that industry. And so what they did was, on the other side of Deep River, about another 10 or 11 miles away in the town of Ralston, they developed, they had a nuclear power training center. And that's where they were training people, to work in the nuclear power industry. So we were in Canada. They were, developing, your nuclear reactors, and so that was where my father was getting his training, was in Ralston. But a lot of the earlier work was done like in Chalk River, secretly developing the nuclear bomb. And they actually, I don't think they did not develop a bomb there. They ran out of, I guess the war had ended, but what they actually did do was they were the first ones to develop using radiation to treat cancer. So
Amazing.
yeah,
I didn't know that.
that's where it was developed. They actually had that was, they had treated, or they used, some type of uranium, to treat cancer, and that's where it all came from. They also had another interesting thing was Jimmy Carter, when he was a naval officer.
Yeah.
They actually had a nuclear meltdown there. Okay, there was a small
Who knew?
small reactor. Well, I mean, that's not a secret. I mean, it was then.
I never heard of that.
Yes.
No.
And they had a partial meltdown. They didn't call it a full meltdown, but it was a partial meltdown, and they flushed the reactor core into a small lake there. I think it was called Perch Lake, or it was some small lake, and I think to this day it's still heavily contaminated. Well, radioactive, I guess. And but Jimmy Carter had come in as a to help. It was when he was a naval officer, because
right.
they didn't have any real experience with that sort of thing, so they called the Americans in, and they came in, and they actually wanted to bury it all in concrete, but I think the people who were there said, no, we can't do that, we need to clean it up. So they actually did go and clean it up, And you know, I can remember getting a tour of the place, you know, walking around as a child and looking at these, you know, these different nuclear small reactors that they had built. And it was, you know, it was quite fascinating.
I'm going to say, yeah, I don't even know, what does a nuclear reactor look like?
Well,
You know, I've never seen one.
Yes.
You read about, I mean, it's
Right.
very big in the news right now with Fukushima and everything that is going on.
Right.
You know, people are very worried about, speaking of an environmental issue, you know, nuclear power and...
Yeah, and I mean, I'm very familiar with that in terms of very comfortable with
obviously.
it because, I mean, you know, my father was in that industry, and, you know, he was a nuclear power operator. And so, you know, we kind of just went where, you know, actually after he had trained in Ralston, we moved down to, you know, a place called Kincardine, which was, you know, where they were building the world's largest nuclear power plant. Now I think they built two, and I think they're getting ready to build a third.
Yeah, one doesn't usually think of Canada as a hub for the nuclear industry.
Well,
So I mean, this is all, you know, news to
they
me.
do have a lot of,
Yeah.
you know, they're big into the nuclear power industry.
Huh.
I mean, they have some very large facilities there, but you know, in Kincardine, the town, there are a number of surrounding towns around that area that grew because of that. You know, it was it's basically their number one employer. So it's a very large facility. Plus, the Canadian nuclear system is different from the American system. So they have a
Better, hopefully, than
well,
ours.
they moderate the reaction, I think, with heavy water. So it's like also on the same grounds they built facilities that would create or develop heavy water. And so you'd have like these 400-foot, you know, towers, you know, like a whole string of them, and you know, with catwalks along them. And you know, I can remember as a summer student, because I worked there, you know, as a student, I worked in the nuclear power plant, and I worked in the heavy water plant. But you would get up like on these catwalks, 400 feet in the air, and I mean, it's just
there's nothing there.
There's just a couple of bars on either side of you, and you're walking along. And the wind is kind of blowing, and it's like, yeah, this is fun. So, it was interesting. You know, I've seen the containment pool where they store the spent fuel from the reactor. I mean, I can remember when.
Wow. So when they talk about all this on the news about Fukushima and things like that, you actually know what they're talking about.
Yes.
You know, because the spent fuel ponds are a very big deal in Fukushima right now.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, because originally when they first opened the facility, and they started, you know, extracting the spent fuel, I mean, you'd go to the pool. It was a very, very deep, very large pool, and you would look down in the corner, and if you looked hard enough, you could see like a faint glow. Well, I can remember going back in there several years later for a tour, and that thing was like, wasn't full, but I mean, it was like really glowing, you know. I mean, it was, you could see it.
So it really does glow. That's not like an urban myth, you know, that, you know.
It's like a turquoise blue, like it's just a very interesting, you know, thing to look at, you know. And you know, it actually just, you know, as I said, because we kind of grew up around that, it didn't seem, you know, I know a lot of people when they talk about nuclear power plants, they don't have a real good opinion of it, I guess, and you know, but of course, growing up with it, you don't think of it as dangerous.
We're all used, right? It's what we grew up with, so we're used to things.
I mean, I do remember, you know, as a student, they would, what they like to do is they like to get the students to go in to clean up the nuclear reactor. You know, when every once in a while they do a shutdown, so they would shut the core down. It's still highly radioactive. Yeah. So what they like to do is, because you're limited to, I can't remember what the limit was, but there was a certain amount of radiation that you were allowed to be exposed to. So what would happen was, they would pick the students, because the students were only there for 3 months, right? So it's like, well, let's you know, get you guys in there and clean things up. And so basically, they would get students to volunteer themselves, and they get all suited up, and you get your, you know, your mask, your gloves, everything.
And you did that. You got suited up.
I got suited up, but I didn't go in. For some reason, I think they had enough people already in there, and they didn't need any more, and you you know, but I mean, it was the type of facility where you had to wear a badge, you had to pee in a bottle every day, or I think was it every day or every week. But they would, you know, always testing you. They'd have these machines that you'd stick your hands in, you put your feet on, because you could pick up the dust on your shoes, you could get it on your hands. You had to wear, you had to basically remove all your clothing and wear their coveralls. And, you know, at the end of your shift, you would, you know, take it off. You'd have to shower, and then you'd have to, you know, go through, again, stations, put your hands in, your feet, you'd, you know, do a body scan, I mean, that sort of thing. And it never really dawned upon me, you know, that, you know, what we were doing. You know, and I've you know, have worked like on the, I guess, the turbine floor. They have like a floor, and it's just these enormous turbines. And they use some kind of oil that if you get any on your skin, it absorbs into your skin, it will kill you. So I did work on that. I have to get suited up and, you know, put all these gloves on and tape up and mask and go out there and, you know, clean the floors. And I've done that a couple of times. And, you know, they keep telling you, you know, just don't touch it, don't touch it. So, I mean, you were working around a lot of dangers. You know, you're exposed to a lot of different things.